I remember as a child hearing other parents telling their children not to play with me. They could catch it. Or, if I went to a friend's house, the parents didn't want the responsibility of having to watch me or deal with me. So I did lose friends. Living with epilepsy is it's more than just the person, the patient. It affects everyone, including the family. And I've learned now at this age just how much it affects the family and the impact that it has. I speak to my brother now, and he shares things with me that I was not aware of back when I was a child. But in the beginning, yes, it was very, very difficult, not only for myself, just to accept it. I lived with a lot of denial, anger, a lot of the why me, you go through all the phases. And I think that the other aspect of it too is that I'm Hispanic, I'm a Mexican American, but that also comes to play into it, the culture that you're in. And living in the Spanish community, it's just different. It wasn't accepted, as much. Um, I have been blessed with such amazing parents and family and extended family that have always looked out for me, have always taken care of me. But it did affect everyone differently. My father was more of, I don't want to say denial, but just had a hard time accepting it. Um, my mom has always been my anchor. So being a parent of a child with epilepsy is a whole different aspect as well. That's you interview my mom and she could tell you so much more. And then my brother, I have one brother. He's 8 years younger than me. And so he grew up seeing a lot of the anxiety and almost chaos of when I would have a seizure because since I didn't have any auras, all you would do is hear the fall. Like you would hear me fall, you know. And then everyone would just kind of run and kind of look for me. I always had to yell out and let everybody know where I was. So if I was going into my bedroom, I had to say. If I was going into the bathroom, I had to say. I couldn't lock doors. If I went into the kitchen, I had to be very careful and not to go near the stove or anything like that. Always announce where I was. Um, what else? My mom, she always kept pillows everywhere in case I had a seizure. She was able to kind of just put the pillow there for me. My mom had mirrors all throughout the house so she could see if I fell, she would be able to run to me and attend to me better. So all of that, we grew up with that as a family, and it made the four of us stronger, I think. We're very, very close. Um, but there were also their downfalls of it that I did not realize at the time because I was a child. I kind of just had that mentality of, oh, I had a seizure, get up and keep going, but I didn't realize the fact that I was leaving with everybody else and the tears and the fears and, all of that. So yes, it does affect everyone in the family differently. But, my parents did a good job of always letting my brother know that they did not, literally, they would tell him, we don't love you any less. It's just your sister needs a little more of our attention. So my brother has always been very understanding of that. I think the biggest thing in our family is anxiety. And I think the seizures and the epilepsy is what caused that, the not knowing. I can now identify the PTSD that it even caused for my parents and possibly even my own brother. Um, just having to live that way and always on edge and always just wondering, is she going to have it? When is she going to have it? What is she going to do? Just, yeah. So that brings out in itself a lot of stress. Now, for me as a child, knowing that to an extent more when I'm going to say more as a teenager, knowing that brought a lot of guilt, um, some shame in that, that I was doing this to my family, I was hurting them. So that kind of all went tied all into the anger part of those teen years that I lived through. With school, I remember when I started having them I was 9 years old, 10 years old. Kids can be mean. um, yeah, I remember, like I said, the first one that I had was in school. It was in an auditorium, and it was a grand show. So coming back to school and hearing the comments, at first the other children thought that I had died, so yeah, so they were just like saying those things to me, oh, we thought you died, or are you a ghost? Did you come back from the living? Blah, blah, blah. And it sounds like nothing. But at that time, as a 9-year-old, and having just gone through that, it was embarrassing. And again, it brings those feelings of shame and guilt. you know um, I did not want to be the center of attention, so every time I had it at school, I became the center of attention. Not only because I actually had the seizure itself, but because the school, for legal reasons, had to call the fire department that would then bring the fire truck, and it was this whole thing. So everyone eventually ended up knowing that when the fire truck was at the school, Monica had a seizure. So it was pretty stressful. It started to affect my grades. So my parents decided to take me out of that public school and put me into a smaller Catholic school. Um, and that was absolutely life changing, because, you're in a smaller environment now. And I was with nuns and fathers that kind of saw this in a different way. Um, and I was entering that phase, that 10, 11-year-old phase, where I then started my menstruation. So my period is connected to my menstrual cycle, which for a lot of women is the same case. Um, so then that became an issue. Every week that I was on my menstruation, I had a seizure or two. So my mother had to call the school and inform the principal, who had to inform the teachers that I was on my period that week. So in the beginning, that was kind of like, kind of weird, but that just became my norm. It just became my norm. So I just had to end up telling everyone. So my entire class pretty much would know when I was on my menstruation. We're talking about an 11, 12-year-old, 13-year-old that time, where as a young girl, there's a lot of issues you're dealing with already. So that was kind of tough. Yeah. Um, Once I was put into that Catholic school, things were much easier for me. And it was a community that was very welcoming, very loving. Um, I believe my parents even spoke with the teachers just to kind of educate them a little bit more on epilepsy and how to go about and how to deal with it. And so I was able to carry that part of it then into the rest of my youth, or my teen years, or into high school. They don't realize that then they put on this medical expense onto my family, and then you're with the guilt of that, and overhearing your parents not necessarily arguing, but seeing these medical bills piling up. And those are not the things that people think about when you say you're living with epilepsy. Oh, it's so much more than just the seizure and the convulsion. That's really the tip of it. It's everything else that's under it or behind it that you deal with and you carry with. Um, but yeah, the schools had to, and it's understandable, they have to call um, for this emergency truck to come in, an ambulance, but then we're left with So I remember waking up sometimes and begging teachers or begging whoever the adult was not to call the ambulance, because then my parents would have to pay $500. I remember thinking that, and it was just the stress of waking up from seizure, and that being your number one concern is, please don't call anybody. I'll be fine. Just give me a minute. When I would have a seizure, for example, like that at a restaurant, it was only natural for my brother to get embarrassed, you know. Um, yeah, things like that. Or I just ruined the dinner, let's say. Now we got to go home, so those kinds of things that you deal with. Yeah. But at the time as a child, I didn't really think about it like that. Um, I think it wasn't until I actually saw a seizure for myself that it kind of changed the way I thought about it. And I know I was around 12 years old when I saw someone actually have a seizure, and it was really really traumatic for me because it's a scary thing to see, And again, everyone's seizure is different, yes, but it was very scary. It was frightening, and to realize that that's what I was doing, um, it took some time for me to have to deal with that. Yeah, it kind of changed my perspective of, okay, so I had a seizure, let me just get up and go. It was kind of like, whoa, this is a bigger deal than I thought. And now I realize why they call the ambulance, and now I realize why they're calling the fire department. Yeah, because again, you have to understand that when you're having the seizure, you just kind of lose consciousness, you just fall and faint, and then you wake up. So you're missing that whole, all that, episode and that scenario where everyone is just kind of running to tend to you and get you the need that you need. Whenever I would fall, I would just fall because I wouldn't know what the seizure was coming on. I would fall and obviously just bump my head on whatever it was. And if there was no one there to attend to me or my mom to put that pillow, that constant hitting of the head, I've realized through the years that has now had effect on me. So I've had some brain scans done, and I've been told that I've have some brain cells that have died, and it was probably due to the constant hitting of the head from the seizures. So that's why it's really important, although they say don't move the person, to just kind of slide a pillow or something soft underneath. Because I'm now dealing with what's the word I'm looking for? Repercussions of that, as at this age now, at 50 years old. Um, let's see. There was one instance as an adult, I think was the worst, when I was working. So I'm a graphic designer and I work on the computer. And I had a seizure. I hit the corner of the table. So I was completely bruised. And that was like that for a while. As I got older as a teenager and I finally came to terms with what I had. Finally, I think I started accepting epilepsy when I was about 17 years old. So before that, those 7 years before that, I was very much just in denial, didn't want it, didn't want anything to do with it. It was very rebellious. There was a point where I stopped taking the medication. My parents had to give it to me, and I'd turn around. And then I would have seizures, obviously. So when I realized, okay, you're having seizures because you're not having the medicine, it was like, take the medicine. So I started taking care of myself, and started thinking about my future. I have a future now. So doctors recommended that I not go into college because they wanted me to live very stress-free life, and take up a simple job, basically. And that's when I realized that that's not what I wanted to do. I did have plans, I did have goals, I did have dreams, and I wasn't going to allow this to stop me. So my mentality started to change about it. I started accepting epilepsy and realizing, okay, if I'm going to do the things that I want to do, I got to accept this, right? And I have to prove that I can do it. So epilepsy for me has been kind of a blessing in disguise, because it has been what's motivated me, and pushed me to do everything that I've done so far. And the more that I was told I couldn't do something, the more that I wanted to prove that I could do it. So when I was told that I could not go to school or further my education, I wanted to prove that I could. Um, so I graduated with a BA in graphic design and a minor in advertising. And then I started looking for work. My first job was as an editorial graphic designer with the Tribune, Chicago Tribune. Um, did I have seizures at work? Yes. Yes, I had many seizures at work. I can look back now, and now that I'm older and aware of, we have things like the AD, American Disabilities Act, that stand behind us. But at the time, when you're not aware of this stuff, I was let go of several jobs because of the seizures. So that was difficult. That was really hard, stopping doing something that I love to do because I'm having seizures at work, and I wasn't meeting the deadlines because I couldn't. So things like that, yes, it definitely affects your work. I've only had one seizure driving. Um, and obviously I don't remember, but I know that I was on the third lane, and I remember feeling it, and I remember thinking I have to get to the first lane. Um, and that's it. And then I woke up. So somehow I made half of the car was sticking out of the first lane, and half was on the side. Fortunately, there was an officer that was behind me, and I don't know, must have saw me swerving, or I don't know, and was able to pull over and call my husband. Saw me having the seizure in the car. After that, I had to deal with that was very traumatic for me. It was very traumatic for me, and I chose not to drive. I felt really guilty. Um, I had to deal with the fact of, what if my kids were in the car? What if something would have happened to me? So I didn't drive for about a year and a half, maybe. Just I was just scared, out of fear, out of trauma. Um, and again, I had such a great community of friends that would take the kids to school and back, and were helping me during that time as I dealt with that. And then finally mentally just got over it and was just like, you know what, this is ridiculous. um, I'll just pull over if I don't feel well. So when I went through my pregnancies, the hormones were all over the place again. I did have various seizures while I was pregnant. I think with my daughter, the last one was when I was 7 months pregnant. I almost fell down the stairs. I was actually, someone behind me was able to catch me. Thank God. Thank goodness. But there's stories like that. Yes. There's stories like that. I've had seizures in public places. I've had seizures. I'm from Chicago, so we use the subway. I've had seizures on the platform. Um, yeah, seizures in elevators. I've had seizures outside on the corners waiting for the bus stop. Yeah, I kind of have had them in a lot of places where, honestly, I probably could have gotten hurt more than I did. Yeah. So those are all the reasons why during the peak of my menstruation, I'll tend to just stay home. People don't realize that, yeah, the way that it impacts your life and those different phases of life. And even as a woman, having epilepsy as a woman is much different than being a man with epilepsy. We have to go through motherhood, the pregnancy. I'm going through the menopause stage, and it's, you don't realize how much epilepsy actually affects your life in all these different areas and phases of life.